Hey, Big Blue Banter listener. Would you like an extra $500? That's a lot of cash. Go to bluewirepods.com/survey and complete the Blue Wire audience survey about you and your podcast listening habits for a chance to win a $500 gift card. This survey will help create a better advertising experience for audiences and, in turn, help this show. That's bluewirepods.com/survey, where all you have to do is answer some simple questions for a chance to win $500. Make sure to read the full terms and disclaimer, plus complete the survey for a chance to win. bluewirepods.com/survey. The link is also in the show notes of this episode.
Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneider, joined as always my co-host Nick Vallata. I hope you had a great weekend over there doing whatever you guys were doing and watching Giants football. I had a packed weekend, Nick. I had my second biggest home draft, all-day event, a lot of fun, some drinking, good time at the auction, crazy auction, unexpected. A lot of unexpected draft picks and just
I absolutely love it, Dan, but I know it's the most virgin behavior ever. And I want to fully sign up for it. Like, I wish I was in that league because I love doing fantasy football with you. It's a ton of fun.
Live auction at the draft. Like, there's nothing beats a live auction, everybody there. First we did drinking, and to make this even more virgin activity, we did board games. Like, we played like board games at night after the draft. Yes, drank and played board games. So that was Sunday. Saturday was obviously golf and watching the Giants.
Obviously.
So yeah, golf and Giants. It's a great Saturday. Can't beat that, really. I mean, you get your two favorite things, football and golf, in one Saturday. So it's good to end the end of, summer, basically, is what it is. Well, next week, and I guess Labor Day is the official end of summer. And we're into football season. And so that's what we're doing today. We're recapping the Giants' last preseason game, and we're giving our 53-man roster predictions. So where do you want to start? Let's start with the last preseason game, Nick. And I think the big topic that we can start with is Evan Neal.
Yeah, Evan Neal. We got to see him. Now, after the game, Evan Neal said he was fine. He was not concerned. It was the same ankle that was rolled up on, but Brian Daboll told Neal that, hey, you're probably going to play 20 to 25 snaps. He played 21 snaps. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to run through just a bunch of Evan Neal tape. And if you'd like, you can check this channel or Big Blue Views channel for a film breakdown of Evan Neal. Look, I thought he was actually really solid, Dan, as a run blocker in these combo blocks. These first two plays that I'm playing at the moment, you can see how he is. I don't want to say he's able to really get low, but he's able to win his blocks once Jalen Mayfield climbs to the second level or once Jalen Mayfield leaves a block. And it's not always the smoothest transition. So am I grasping at straws? I don't think so, because we've seen good tape from Evan Neal as a run blocker, but this whole experiment of Evan Neal playing tackle, it needs to be perfect for it to work. And what I mean by that is his footwork, his angle discernment, his hands, his anchor, all of those things need to be at like the 95th percentile for him not to be exploited by some of the better edge rushers from wide angles. And we've seen that all throughout his career. I'm not willing to say that it's completely out of the picture because he's dealt with so many injuries. And this was the first time he's played since he had his ankle surgically repaired. But I'm starting to really favor the whole, like, hey, maybe we should just try this guy at guard, because I just don't know if he's athletic enough and quick enough to be a tackle who's not a liability. And I hate the fact that I'm saying that right now, but that could be the case.
Yeah, it's very interesting. After the game, Nick, and I had a chance to go back and watch all of his snaps as well. And after the game, he gave an assessment of his play that I actually felt was pretty accurate as to what actually happened. He talked about how he felt really good about what he put in the run game, and I thought that was a good point. He played well in the run game, all things considered, though, there were some run plays where he also ended up on the ground, Nick, and that's just something that has been an Evan Neal constant, even dating back to Alabama. Too many times a little off balance on the ground, even in the run game. Pass game, he felt like, he had the one bad snap where he overset, and that was it. But
no, he didn't overset. He didn't set far. He said Yeah, he said after the game, he's like, I just misjudged the set. He probably needed to get wider.
Yeah. Not overset. He misjudged the set. But I felt like watching some of his other pass pro plays, they weren't that pretty besides that either. Like, there were some moments where it's like, there's an example you just put up a few plays ago, maybe 6 plays ago, where he didn't fully get beat, but it was similar to what you just said, where, like, does he have what's necessary to win against those speed rushers who are going to beat him up the arc? And that's how they're going to beat him, because that's how they've always beat him since he made it to the NFL.
If we see more plays like this one, where he's able to, he's not perfect, like getting up the arc, and you have a softer edge 458 to bend through, but he's able to use his power and still maintain some sort of spatial relationship with this edge rusher to throw him up the pass rushing arc like he does. That's excellent.
That's
but then
fine. Yeah.
There's 3 sacks in a row for Tommy DeVito, and that was the second. And here's the third. And this one was probably, I mean, it's solely on really Josh Azudu, but Evan Neal, we watch him get bullied back, and that's a part of his game that I don't fully understand why.
Yeah.
His anchor is, it's not like he's getting driven back like we see with Josh Azudu right here, but there are times where Evan Neal gets pumped like 3 steps back, and that pocket gets really, really tight to the point where a long-armed edge rusher can just come down and hit the quarterback. And it's just, I just don't fully understand how a 6'8", 350-pound offensive lineman struggles so poorly with his anchor when it comes to these wide rushers and him absorbing that contact. It's something that he significantly struggles with, to keep those hips low and to just kind of sink back on those hips and just absorb that overall contact, man.
Yeah, it's something that's also part of his game. I don't really understand it either. You thought you were getting Orlando Brown Jr., you thought you were getting DeJuan Jones in that regard. You're not getting either of them. You're getting a guy who doesn't have that anchor somehow. I don't know exactly what he offers at this point for you as a tackle, outside of like sometimes in those combo blocks in the run game, he can use his size and his power. Other than that right now, Nick, I don't it's hard to really pinpoint what the upside is with him and what he's offering you just from an overall standpoint as a tackle. So that's why you consider moving him to guard. And I don't know if the Giants are going to do this at this stage. To me, this is something you should have done earlier in the offseason if you were going to do it at all. But we're at the point here where he's going to be a backup going into week 1. I think that's almost a guarantee at this point. And they kind of have their backup swing tackle in their minds in Josh Azudu, I guess, which doesn't, make us feel all that confident either. But it's kind of leaves him in a weird spot, Evan Neal.
No, it doesn't. And I think I'd rather see Neal be the backup tackle than Josh Azudu by far. So that lends credence to the idea of just keeping him at tackle. Right. But if you want this 7th overall pick to be actualized as a starter, then moving him to guard is more favorable when you're projected to start a 34-year-old you just picked up as your starting guard more than likely. So there's a lot to consider here. And I'm, hopefully just trust the Giants and how they want to evaluate this, but it's not a great situation. But I also don't think this tape was terrible, which is a good situation.
Yeah.
We're just looking for baby steps at this point. All I want is baby steps that Evan Neal can prove that he can be an NFL player who is not a complete liability for your offense. I think we saw some baby steps there, but that glaring critical vulnerability of Evan Neal manifested again in the game.
Though it's tough to see, at this stage, if the baby steps are even what I understand where you're coming from, but I don't know at this stage if that's enough, because if we're talking about baby steps in year 3, it's like, let's say he doesn't convert to guard, and that's not part of the Giants' plans. I know we've discussed it as a possibility so we can kind of actualize his talent, but if he doesn't, and he's bench all year, Nick, and they stay healthy at the 2 tackle spots, we're going to be entering year 4, and this guy had just taken a whole year off of playing football after being injured the first 2 years. At that stage, it's almost like it's a wrap. Maybe at that point they can try in year 4 to convert him to guard and see what happens. But, you're talking about another wasted asset, and it is very, very difficult. I made this point a couple days ago on Twitter. It is very difficult to be a winning franchise when you're throwing out 7th overall picks. It's no coincidence to me the Giants have been so bad over the last decade with 4 wasted first-round picks: Eric Flowers, Eli Apple, DeAndre Baker, and Kadarius Toney. And I mean wasted. You got nothing out of any of those. And people say, "Oh, don't bring up the Gettleman stuff anymore. He's been gone for 3 years." Well, guess what? One of those picks was 2021. One of them was 2019. This is the time where those guys are supposed to be helping your franchise. They're supposed to be your core guys. They're your only swings at those assets. There's a few blue chip shots you get a year. You can't just throw them out. So I don't know what else to do with Neal at this point. I kind of hope they do try to convert him to guard, Nick, just for the sake of trying to salvage something out of that.
I think I'm right there with you. There's only one player on this roster that Joe Schoen hasn't tinkered with his contract or re-signed or brought him himself or drafted, and that's Azeez Ojulari.
Yeah.
That's the only player. Isn't that nuts, man? Roster turnovers quick, man. 2021.
I think that happens more with the bad teams. I think that's part of the reason, since the Giants are where they've been at as a franchise. I think, when you're like that, you don't locate guys in the draft. But to be fair, Shane has done a poor job locating guys in the draft as well. Josh Azudu is not looking good. Cordell Flott is not looking good. Evan Neal is not looking good. These are premium picks that he made that it's looking bad on all 3.
Let's hope some of these back end roster guys we're going to talk about later in the episode, they can end up being capable players.
Right.
And it'll be like, oh, look, Joe Shane identified this guy, an undrafted free
Right.
agent. He came in and look at him. He's starting and he's good. And they're talking about him in like 6 years. He's still on the Giants. That would be.
And he's done a better job of that. That's the ironic thing, or not ironic. That's the quirky thing. That's like the yin yang of it. Like he's found Jason Pinnock. He's found McLeod. He's done some of this back end stuff really well. But it's just the front end. It's like the premium assets. It's where he's been struggling a little bit as a general manager, at least, with those 3 players we mentioned.
And it's undeniable too. It's just, do you think that referendum on Shane is enough to force him to lose his job? I'm not quite there yet.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's that combined. It's the 2 big things. It's that combined with look at what he's entering a season with from a quarterback room standpoint. To go Jones, DeVito, and Locke into a season, it's tough. It's a tough pill for a lot of fans to swallow here. And it is what it is. They didn't want to prioritize Tyrod. I think Tyrod also, my guess is he didn't want to be here. I know that it wasn't really mentioned by anyone. It wasn't shown on Hard Knocks. But if you're Tyrod Taylor and you're healthy and you're on the bench for Tommy DeVito, a guy who we see in this preseason should not be starting over Tyrod Taylor, it's a tough pill to swallow. I know he was winning games, but why would you? And you were never given a fair shot to beat Jones. It was never a competition. You were never given a true competition to win QB1, despite quite honestly putting together better film than Jones last year. So for him, I'm sure he wanted to get out of here. But for the Giants, they're left with Locke, Jones, and DeVito heading into the year.
Yeah, and that's look, we'll talk a little bit more actually about the game before we get into the roster projections. But look, dude, there wasn't really much from a scheme takeaway other than I feel like a lot of creative rushing styles and a little bit of a chess match that you watched between Robert Saleh's defense and Brian Dable with some of the rushing plays that were called. But we saw that all throughout training camp and all throughout preseason. We're going to see that in the regular season, and we will break that down in depth in the regular season for the for this preseason game. We're not going to go too far in depth when it comes to a lot of these guys, some of them who have already been released by the Giants, which we'll get into also here in a little bit. But there is one more name or 2 more names or a few more names I want to mention, mostly on the defensive side of the football. KJ Cloyd was everywhere in this game. This is a guy the Giants picked up mid-camp. He had 16 tackles in this game, and I'm going to run some of his plays as well here in a little bit. But the Giants need linebacker depth desperately right now. Like Carter Coughlin just came back from the injury that he suffered. Matt Adams is still out with his injury. And then you have Bobby Okereke, Micah McFadden, who has been injured all throughout training camp. And then Deontay Johnson, who is still week to week with his lower body injury. So I'm looking at this Cloyd guy. I don't know if he'll make the final roster. The Giants might try to, sneak him through onto the practice squad, but he had a really impressive game. And I'm about to show you clips once I can locate them.
Yeah, and it's interesting just because he plays that linebacker position. And you didn't even mention Deontay Johnson, who's also injured.
I did.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I missed the Deontay Johnson, but who's also injured there. So
yeah, exactly. The lower body
injuries.
Dude, it's been rough, man. It's just, I don't know, man. I'm very concerned about this defense. We talk a lot about the offense, rightfully so. The Giants offense has been, pathetic basically for the last, 5 or 6 years. Just couldn't really do anything, not explosive. But I look at this defense and there are some serious depth concerns. And even if they are 100% healthy, you can identify the strength, the defensive line. You have Bobby Okereke, but then you're still like, yo, Deonte Banks, please be like the player we think you are. And then after that, it's like, we'll see. Like I believe in some of their skill sets, no doubt, Dan, but like this is the NFL, development, if you want development to happen week to week, that's fine. But if you're not at a certain baseline and you're out there starting and you have miscommunications on the back end because this is a new defense, that can really lead to some explosive plays against you and then resentment and then a bad environment on a team that frankly has not been good for the last several years other than 2022 when you went to the playoffs and exceeded expectations. So man, I'm concerned about what we might see on defense, but hope you're enjoying these KJ Cloyd plays.
Yeah, he looked great in this game against the third string. I mean, look, these are all guys fighting for the roster spot, but this guy played great football, and he's one of the only healthy guys left, KJ Cloyd. So maybe he does have an outside shot. We'll see in a moment if either Nick or I are predicting him for the final 53 or a practice squad spot, but something to consider. Had a great game. I will say this about the defense. I'm still leaning on the hope, Nick, that when push comes to shove and we get to real football, the regular season week 1, the D-line will overwhelm. I do have a strong feeling still in my head. Just watching some of those joint practices, Burns was so good in the run game in those joint practices, and I think he's going to be really much better than people realize in the run game. Dexter, Burns, obviously Dexter, Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, and then whatever they can move into that for their last spot in the rotation, Chapman, maybe whoever they get, DJ Davidson. Regardless, I feel like that front can help them kind of negate some of the issues on the back end, but time will tell if that's too much of an optimistic take.
Casey Rogers is another name, the interior defensive lineman, UDFA out of Oregon, who had a really good game. Plays like this one that you're watching at the moment, where 76, he absorbs the combo, 76 ends up landing that long arm. And then watch how he just tosses him right as the running back is running past him. Just like very adaptive plays where he can react very quickly to make stops or tackles for a loss. We've seen that all throughout preseason. He's probably not going to make the roster, but another core practice squad is Casey Rogers, in my opinion. And I'll say this too about the Brian Burns point that you made. Brian Burns is best as a run defender when he is evading and running around offensive linemen who are trying to block him. And that can work to some extent, but that can also be exploited. And that puts a burden on the other players who are playing behind Brian Burns, the linebackers and the secondary pieces who are going to be containing around him. If Brian Burns tries to shoot inside and the play is to the outside, because Shane Bowen wants to attack, he can just get pinned into that B gap. And now you're going to have that secondary contain that forced defender, because Brian Burns is going inside. He's not the forced defender. It's going to put a lot on him if he's coming from depth. And I've seen Burns kind of, I don't want to say like wield it, like free will it himself on the line of scrimmage, but he does try to avoid those blocks and he can take risks in doing so. And that is something that I think creative offensive coordinators can exploit if he is not winning at the point of attack, which I think he is capable of doing. Like Burns is I was looking at him at training camp, like no diddy. He's like a bigger dude than you think, bro. Like his legs are pretty freaking thick. Right. So I'm hoping that he can stack and shed and be able to anchor down when he's tasked to, but that wasn't really his game when he was playing in Phil Snow's defense over there in Carolina.
Yeah, we'll have to see. And maybe I am a little over optimistic about what this D-line can do for the rest of the defense. Time will tell.
Pass rushing, I'm fully on board with you there, man. Like pass rushing, I think Dex and Burns, that's such a cool combination. What you can do with them is going to be so fun. And then you add Kayvon in. We still need to see another level of development from Kayvon, but this should only help him, right? And then Azeez, if Azeez doesn't get traded, which I don't think he's going to, but there's like little whispers about that. Do you have anything on that? I don't think that's going to happen, but people are like, oh, how much would the Giants get for Azeez Ojulari if they sent him to this team? So I think like the Cardinals just lost his brother and also the guy they drafted in the first round out of Missouri. I think a couple other teams have suffered some edge injuries. And it's just interesting because we've seen Shane be willing to go to the trade market to benefit not just the short term, but also the long term of his franchise when it makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. We haven't seen him do too many of those trades, though, like the veteran for the draft pick. I don't see any value. And I've seen Giants fans discuss trading Ojulari or Neal. I see no point or no value in it. You're going to get a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick out of that at best. Why not keep these guys who are team control cheap under their contract? Look, they haven't been great, but I'm definitely not dumping Evan Neal for a 5th or 6th or 7th round pick right now.
No, neither am I. And neither am I with Ojulari either. Unless it was like,
they don't have enough depth for this type of stuff. Like it's just like they're not in a position right now for any of this.
There were a couple edge rushers that caught my eye, but I mean, I feel so much more comfortable, obviously, with Azeez Ojulari. But like players like Benton Whitley had a really good training camp in preseason. Timon Fox had a really good 3rd preseason game. Didn't really see him much in the previous 2, a little bit, but the 3rd preseason game, he was all over the place. He caused a sack that he didn't get credit for as well. So those are names, but like you look at Azeez Ojulari, it's a completely different type of cat than those two.
Right. They need to keep him for depth. They need to keep him for injury purposes and for rotational purposes. All right. Anything else that you wanted to discuss from this last preseason game?
No, man, I'm just so excited for the regular season. Like Dan, we have so many things planned. It's going to be great going through the film, going through the tape, breaking down the X's and O's, and hopefully we see real football with Brian Dable as the play caller in his system. And him having this playbook completely opened up for a quarterback who's been in the system now. This is his 3rd season with an actual superstar possibly at wide receiver. So I'm excited for it, but I'm just hoping the Giants figure it out defensively and their offensive line protects Daniel Jones and Daniel Jones doesn't fall flat on his face and Malik Neighbors is as good as we think. And there's a lot of hopes there. But
there are a lot of
excited.
The 4th one being something I'm not concerned with at all, though.
That's the last one I'm concerned with. Like of all the hopes,
Neighbors is that dude.
I think he is.
May not show. Again, receiver. It's not just on him. Yes, he needs the other parts that could be, competent. But we'll see what happens there. Obviously, those are the interesting factors. But yeah, it's exciting just to get back to real football. I just want to watch tape and see what they look like on real tape. Like you can go by some of the preseason reps, but like there's no scheme. And you can tell some of these guys, like, and I saw people like, oh my God, is Keenan Allen shot? My take is that Keenan Allen's just not running these preseason routes at 100%. Like, why the F would you? If you're 30 something years old, I would never run a preseason route at 100%. There's nothing to gain from that at all. And you could easily get hurt. So I think some of the Giants players, we haven't seen their best yet, and we'll see it in the regular season. It's going to be interesting. Minnesota is a beatable game, win a week 1 game. They can get out to 1-0.
They could get out to 2-0 realistically.
They need to get out to 2-0 realistically to have any shot this year, looking at the schedule, because it gets rough after the first 2 weeks.
It definitely does. Now, just some notes on the projection that Dan and I are about to go over. There's been new rules in the NFL. In the past, when you cut a player and you wanted to designate them for the IR, you had to give them a roster spot, right? They would make the roster, and then you would cut a player, and then you would have to put them on the IR in the following day or two, and then you'd have to go and hope that nobody else picked up the player that you just cut. We've seen that a lot. Well, this year, you're allowed to put 2 players on the injured reserve and save 2 roster spots, but the only caveat to that is the 2 players that you end up putting on injured reserve, they count towards the 8 total injured reserve spots that you have. Well, 8 total if you activate them, obviously, and you're planning more than likely to activate a lot of these players if you're going to place them on injured reserve. So there have been a little bit of changes, and there's going to be, like, I feel like projecting the roster, Dan, is a little difficult because now with the practice squad, you can put like 30-year-old Allen Robinson on the practice squad, whereas like 4 or 5 years ago, you couldn't do that, right? So did I explain that well enough when it came to how it's different, how it's slightly different this season, that we're not going to see, oh, wow, they cut, Isaiah McKenzie. I thought they really liked him. And then they pick him up like the next day, like the Bucks did with Logan Ryan a couple years ago. There's a lot of teams that do that. We're not going to see as much of that, more than likely, because you can just designate somebody for the IR right off the bat. You don't need to do all of that hoopla.
Right.
Before.
Yeah, I guess the NFL found a way to just get rid of all that nonsense. But it is interesting that you can put like the Allen Robinson types on the practice squad as well. So we'll have to see if what they do with that.
Thanks COVID for that.
Yeah, it's an interesting little quirk the NFL has added, Nick. I don't know if the Giants have any players who are going to fit the billing completely, as good enough to use one of those 8 spots on. And at the same time, it makes the roster projection very difficult because these injured players, you don't know exactly if you want to put them on your final 53. All right, Nick. So let's go position by position on this 53-man roster prediction, see where we can get to. So let's start with the quarterback position. How many you got and who you got?
Oh, man. So this is where it gets really tough. I want to keep 2. And Tommy DeVito hasn't done anything in preseason to make me say, oh, yeah, the Giants can't slip him through the practice squad. But when you go through the available quarterbacks on the market, there's really only one name out there that is like, oh, that's kind of respectable, and that's Ryan Tannehill, right? So I'm looking, you're like, you got Daniel Jones. You have Drew Lock, kind of hurt right now with the hip. And Brian Daboll has a very complex system where he was able to take a UDFA and win 3 games with him last season in Tommy DeVito. And part of me thinks they're because of those injuries are going to keep 3. So I actually have them keeping 3, although I don't love it.
Yeah, and remember, this is what we're doing here is a prediction of what we think will happen, not what we will do. But we will go over what we will do on each step of the way too. So I am actually I'll go over both. So what I would do is I would keep 2 quarterbacks. I see minimal to no interest in Tommy DeVito long-term. I hate to say it. Nice kid, great story. I think his limitations have been very obvious in the preseason. I think part of the reason he found success last year is nobody had any tape on him. Now people have tape on him. And I think it's going to be a really bad rude awakening if he has to play again at any point. And I just don't see any point of him long-term. So to me, that's just a waste of a roster spot. And I don't think anyone's claiming him off the practice squad personally. I know there's bad depth across the NFL, but again, to claim him, you have to put him on your 53-man roster. You can't just add him to your practice squad. So there's a lot of protection over that because it's just, is anyone going to put Tommy DeVito on their 53-man at this stage? He doesn't know the system at all. Like that's like they're burning a roster spot. Unless they really see some kind of long-term upside there. So to me, it makes a bunch
of sense, by the way, everything you're saying right now, like I completely agree with. I just, I think the injuries are more of the reason why.
And that's a great point. I was just going to say, to me, the reason I'm going to go with they'll keep 3. And I just changed my mind basically on the spot because of that is because of Lock's injury. Like you just can't afford to go into a year with Locke not being perfectly ready. And then what happens if Jones, who's been injured almost every year of his career, gets hurt? You're like, oh shit, we're back to the Fromm days of like claiming Fromm off somebody's practice squad, the Bills, and being like, Fromm, you got 1 week or 2 to get ready. Here we go. But that's not the case. DeVito knows the system. And so last second, I am actually going to go with 3. Locke, DeVito, and Jones here.
Before we get into the running backs, we should go through real quick just who was cut already. It happened on Sunday night. Matt Nelson was cut, the offensive tackle. Kyler Ball, defensive lineman. Cornerback Breon Borders. Safety Clayton Isbell. Wide receiver John Giles. Running back Joshua Kelly. Linebacker Trey Kaiser. Running back Lorenzo Lingard. Wide receiver Ira Asante. And then offensive lineman Marcus McKeithen. Now, the only name that really jumps out there would be McKeithen. And I'm not expecting any more cuts to really be announced until Tuesday. That's probably what's going to happen Tuesday morning when a lot of those guys end up reporting back to the facility. But those were the first round of cuts. 5th round pick from 2022, already off the roster, will likely land on the practice squad along with some of those other players like Asante and maybe Giles and players like that.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens there as far as practice squad goes.
I love a great deal as much as the next guy. But I'm not going to enter a parallel universe or go through some elaborate labyrinth just to save a few bucks. It has to be easy. No hoops, no BS. So when Mint Mobile said it was easy to get wireless for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan, I called them on it. Turns out, it really is that easy to get wireless for $15 a month. It's easy to switch to. The website has a good interface. I have a couple buddies who have recommended this to me. They speak highly of Mint Mobile. Get started. Go to mintmobile.com/BBB. That is 3 Bs. There you'll see that right now, all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. Plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all your existing contacts. Find out how easy it is to switch to Mint Mobile and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/BBB. That's mintmobile.com/BBB. 3 Bs. Triple B. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/BBB. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
You ever feel sluggish or out of focus? Are you stressed? Has your digestive system caused discomfort or flatulence like a certain co-host on this podcast during a live stream? If so, you should check out AG1. When I started drinking AG1 daily, I could feel a real difference in my daily health. I had more energy, I was better off at the gym, and I could focus on my work in a much more efficient manner. That's because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health. Not only did I replace my multivitamin with AG1, but I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut support. I recommend AG1 to all my family and friends because AG1 has a team of doctors and scientists that formulate around the latest science and maintains high quality standards within the industry. Even my friends have started drinking AG1, and they always tell me how energetic they feel and how it's helped them out at the gym, and also it's helped them manage their stress levels. That's why we're happy to have AG1 as our partner. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs when you first subscribe. Go to drinkag1.com/banter. That's drinkag1.com/banter to check it out. Our mental and physical well-being is of the utmost importance. Whether you're a world-class athlete or a podcaster like me, we all need to take that very seriously. That's why I'm excited that Unified Healing is sponsoring this episode of the Big Blue Banter podcast. Unified Healing is a new and super innovative global network of wellness centers powered by Energy Enhancement System, or EE System. If you haven't heard of the EE System yet, you'll want to listen up. This technology promotes wellness, deep relaxation, purification, and rejuvenation. Whether you're here in New York, New Jersey, Arizona, if you will, or hundreds of other locations across the globe, access to a center is easy and affordable. Interested in experiencing the EE System technology for yourself? Go to unifiedhealing.com/banter to learn more and find a center near you. That's UNIFYD healing.com/banter. No material or testimonials on the Unified Healing website are intended to be viewed as medical advice or a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment. And before undertaking a new healthcare regimen, include EE System.
All right, Nick, let's go to running backs. This one we had some discussions about throughout the entire month of August. A lot of debates about what would happen. Things have changed. Preseason kind of shaped things up. Where are you at now with running backs?
I got 3, Dan, and it sucks because I love my guy Dante Miller, but I think it's going to be, well, 3 depending on where you consider Jakob Johnson. All right, so Devin Singletary, he's going to be the starter. Tyrone Tracy, I think he'll play a lot. He's one of those players where it's like, oh, he's kind of injured, but I think it's not nearly as severe as we originally anticipated. Then Eric Gray is going to get a roster spot. So that leaves Dante Miller, and then Lorenzo Lingard and Joshua Kelly were already cut. I think the Giants will try to put Dante Miller on their practice squad. This is the one player, though, that I left off of my final 53 where I'm like, I could see the Giants still trying to slip him in there, maybe at the expense of a quarterback if they think Tommy DeVito is not going to get claimed. This is where it gets really interesting because Brian Daboll and the Giants, and Joe Shane, they understand how a lot of the rest of the league thinks, right? And what the rest of the league may need. So they might have a better opinion or a better, more knowledge, more understanding, more comprehensive understanding on what those other teams may do, which could influence what they do with their own roster. If they think like, oh man, I know these guys love Dante Miller, I just put him on the 53. He's not getting through. I think that might also apply to players like Jake Kubis or some of these other back end UDFA type of players that the Giants like. So that's a little tidbit there, but I have 3, 4 if you want to include Jakob Johnson. I have him as a tight end though right now.
Yeah, I like that take by you. I like both those takes. The first one, that again, circling back, DeVito, I do think will make the roster based on what you said, the injury situation with Locke, and kind of just how many times Jones has been injured. You kind of need someone who knows the system in there. And then with Miller, it's like, and guys like that, we'll get to more. It's like, does the league kind of not know them as much? Like DeVito was a star, I guess you can call it, in the league last year, at least somebody who the league knows about, right? After with what he did, winning those 3 games. That might not be the case for Miller. I'm going to go with the same group that you went with. I had Jakob in this just because I put a fullback there, but that's the big one for me. The rest are obviously locks. I feel like at least Tyrone Tracy got that scare earlier in camp. Thank God it would turn out to be nothing crazy. And I think he'll be ready for a big role right away in week 1. That's something I'm really excited about. If you're talking about things that I'm excited about this year, it's watching Tyrone Tracy play football for the New York Giants and get actual touches, because I think he's that explosive and that has that much upside with the ball in his hands. Eric Gray obviously proved himself this preseason. And then Jakob Johnson, I think, is the interesting one. I think you could go both ways. I just feel like they're going to find value in having him on the roster, not just from the fact that he can play those snaps at fullback, but also on special teams. And I think this is the type of team, Nick, that will do better when they run under center, play action. They don't want to say heavier personnel with a fullback on the field, but I do in the sense of like selling run to open up your pass. And to get more defined one-on-one options for Malik Neighbors and Hyatt and Slayton. So I think he has value.
All right. Tight end is interesting because I don't know how healthy Lawrence Cager is. And I agree with you that the Giants might not burn one of those IR spots on any of these guys, but Lawrence Cager is the one player where I'm like, I just don't know because I think the term that was used was he's going to be out for an extended period of time. And that was around like a week ago, like August 20th, August 19th. I don't know how long an extended period of time is. I saw Lawrence Cager in the locker room. I believe it was Lawrence Cager. And he looked like he was moving around fine, but that's not cutting on the field. And we remember that he came back after the initial groin injury and got hurt that practice on the interception in the end zone by Tyler Nubin. So I think I'm going to put Cager in that IR spot. I think I'm just going to do that because I did not exactly know how the Giants are going to handle this situation. So that leaves me with Daniel Bellinger, Theo Johnson, and Chris Manhertz with Jack Stoll on the out. So that's where I'm at with the tight end. So that would be 4, I guess, tight ends or 3 tight ends. But it really depends on how you consider Jakob Johnson. And then Lawrence Cager on the IR with Jack Stoll being released.
Yeah, I guess with the Jakob thing, we don't know. Yeah. It's fine, though. You're considering tight end. I'm considering it's the same idea. I don't have anything different there either. The only one that I was considering was Cager, but I think with the injury, he'll miss it. Look, Theo is going to play a bigger role than we originally projected, I think, in year 1, at least, Nick. I think there's an opportunity for him to play more snaps than Bellinger this year if things break a certain way. He's had a lot of first-team reps throughout the entirety of camp, including despite the fact that he started slow. Manhertz has proven himself as well. I think all 3 of these guys are going to play a lot of football this year, all 3 of the tight ends, which is awesome. And they may not be all on the field at once in 12 personnel, but just mixing and matching them in different 11 personnel looks, it's nice to have. They have so much more depth, I feel, at least than they had last year at this position. Obviously, they weren't projecting Waller to be hurt, but he was hurt, and it kind of screwed up their whole plans. So I feel more comfortable here at this position than I have. We could start talking about that too, like where we feel versus last year. I definitely feel more comfortable this year at tight end.
I do too, which is funny because you wouldn't imagine losing a star like Darren Waller would lead to us feeling more comfortable about it. But it really just comes down to depth and variety. The Giants have depth and variety. Last year, they had Daniel Bellinger behind Darren Waller and Lawrence Cager, and there really was no depth or no variety there other than the top 2 guys. And we know Waller dealt with his injury. Bellinger had a little bit of a nick there too. So I do feel better about the tight end position. I don't feel better about the running back position. I don't feel better about the quarterback position.
I agree on both. Not better about running back, not better about quarterback. All right, wide receiver. I'm going to go with my picks here. And this was the toughest one, I think, to figure out.
It's tough.
Especially because there's injuries too, like Gunnar Olszewski is hurt. That's interesting. They also have like the Allen Robinson situation. So I'm going to go with the easy ones first, okay? The big 4, Neighbors, Slayton, Hyatt, Wandell. And there's been discussion, Nick, about, should they trade Slayton? Can they trade Slayton? No, they cannot trade Slayton. Slayton not only is going to be a big part of the offense and within the rotation, but when you only have 4 deep at wide receiver of guys that can play the position. So I would argue 5 or 6 if you count Allen Robinson and Hodgins, but some people aren't as high on them. But I think they could play at the NFL level if they needed to be. But you can't afford to cut or trade a guy like Slayton, in my opinion, at all. So I don't even think that's a possibility. Those 4. I'm going to actually go with, Boykin, I think, is the lock, is the 5th, just because of what he offers on special teams. My 53 is going to include Isaiah Hodgins, because I think that Hodgins, you need a 5th guy who you can trust to get on the field due to injuries to the position. It's a very injury-prone position. And he's proven when given the opportunity, he can block. You can use him as a blocker and feel comfortable as a 2-way player in the run or pass game, not tipping off your play. And he can make plays in the passing game. He's not great, but he can make plays in the passing game. He's not fast. I went with Gunnar, but I know Gunnar's hurt. Is that probably something that will be one of those situations we were discussing? What do you think on that? Like, Gunnar was my 7th.
I don't think they're going to use an IR spot on Gunnar. The only reason why I suggested that with Cager is because it does seem like the Giants really love Lawrence Cager. But that might not even have. They might just, see if they could just slip him through waivers. No one's going to claim a hurt guy kind of thing, right?
Right.
But then he's on his practice squad, which leads to somebody can claim him there. So it gets tricky. But with Gunnar, I actually have Isaiah McKenzie making it over him.
But you have 7?
No, I have 6.
So no Hodgins or no Boykin?
No Hodgins.
Okay.
Yeah. So mine are Neighbors, Slayton, Hyatt, McKenzie, Wandale Robinson, and Miles Boykin.
Okay.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't love the whole Isaiah McKenzie as a punt returner. Like, that's his role. That's what he does. But like, I just feel like every time I watch him back there, I just get a little uncomfortable because I've seen him muff it and like drop it. Whereas Gunnar, I think he had a reputation of doing that maybe in the past. I've never really seen him drop. I think I've seen him drop like 1 or 2 punts throughout all of training camp, Gunnar Olszewski, but he's dealing with some sort of injury at the moment, and that could affect if he makes this roster or not. So, Dan, I'm going with McKenzie. Let's move on, though, to the offensive line. How many offensive linemen you had, buddy?
This is an interesting one. It was very difficult to figure these out. I think, given the situation with where they're at on the offensive line, they're going to keep one more than they typically have. I went with 9 guys, Nick. I went with the big 5: Thomas, Illuminor, Neal as the tackle. Thomas, Illuminor, Neal, Azudu, 4 tackles. Runyon, JMS, that's 6. Van Roten, 7. Stinney and Schlottman. So those are my 9 I went with on the offensive line.
Yeah, I was going back and forth, man. I'm like, so I have 9 as well, but it comes down to Schlottman or Jake Kubis.
Yes.
And I really like Jake Kubis. And this just comes down to how risky do the Giants want to get with trying to slide him through waivers. There's that, but there's also, do you want to not have a true backup center behind JMS when JMS is dealing with his injury? And that's what Austin Schlottman is. And Austin Schlottman has received a lot of first team reps. He's received third team reps. So it's kind of hard to really discern where he is standing with this coaching staff. Ultimately, though, I think the Giants will go with, I think I'm going to go with Schlottman, and then I'm going to try to get tricky and get Kubis onto it. Yeah. But that's a risk. And I like Jake Kubis a lot. I talked with him after the game. You know, Ed was asking him questions about, hey, like, how do you, what are you going to do in these next coming days? Like, hey, man, I can control what I can control. I'm that kind of guy, you know? And I think he actually has some pretty damn good tape. So I'm hoping that he makes a team. But I think the Giants might look at their center situation with John Michael Schmitz and be like,
right,
if we do not bring Schlottman along, that means Greg Van Roten is going to be playing center, and then Aaron Stinney will slide in, which isn't a terrible situation, but you're just moving parts and pieces around, and you're not going to form a completely cohesive unit, right? So that's where I think I am as well.
Yeah, and that's what it came down to for me, Nick. In the end, ultimately, we got reports back from the game, and it was clean for Neal. It was clean for JMS. Nothing crazy there from the injuries they sustained in game, but JMS has had an injured shoulder that he missed time with earlier this year. He had an injured shoulder last year. A lot of injuries have piled up with him over the last 2 years. So to just have that safety and to have someone else who can do it. Look, maybe they feel comfortable with Van Roten doing it. Maybe they don't, because he hasn't played much and he did it a little bit in camp early, but that's not necessarily something you can feel totally comfortable with. And then in addition to that, like you said, you're shifting the line, you're reshuffling it, and you're getting to a point where now the continuity is broken as well. Versus if you just put someone in like Schlottman and you keep the rest the same, you might have a better chance of keeping continuity across the board, or at least a better version of continuity. So I think that's going to play a role. And I think they have a little bit of flexibility with the situation at receiver, maybe keeping a guy less if they go 6 or 7. And just the fact that, you know, at least for me, if they go quarterback, they can keep it at 2. But, you know, the DeVito thing makes it a little more tricky because I did add him back at the end. So maybe, you know, looking back on this, I would take one receiver away and add an O-line, or, you know, and keep this O-line or take one of these guys left. But I think it came down to me, and at those tough decisions, I would keep Schlottman just so I have that safety at center.
I like it, man. I do.
What killed us last year? It was that we didn't have the O-line depth, and we got down to a point where we're starting like ridiculous guys on the offensive line.
Yeah, one of them was just released on the first round of cuts.
Right. Yeah. It's just like that's the, like, what's more, if you're the Giants, you're like making these tough calls. Okay, do I want another special teamer at wide receiver? Do I want DeVito, or do I want to have some kind of some safety valve at the offensive line? To me, it's that. If it was up to me.
If it was up to me, though, just based off skill set and upside, like I want Kubis to make it. You know, I like Jake Kubis, and I want him to make it. I think that could just be some roster trying to manipulate rosters and banking on somebody not taking them. Defense, though, Dan. Defensive line. So I think this Dexter Lawrence guy is going to make the team.
Probably.
Rakeem Nunez-Roches, Jordan Riley, Elijah Chapman, and DJ Davidson. So I have 5 with Riley and Davidson both making it.
Yeah, those are my same 5 as me. This one feels pretty cut and dry. I guess you could argue the only one who might be on the bubble would be Riley, but I highly doubt it given what we've seen so far at this whole summer. So it just feels like those 5 are very locked in. I guess earlier you could make the case, like earlier in August or July, someone might make the case, oh, Chapman's probably a bubble guy, but I think it's pretty clear after what we saw in the 3rd preseason game, he ain't a bubble guy. He's locked in.
Nah, he's locked in. Ryder Anderson would have made the team, but he is injured as well. A lot of players who were on the fringes are dealing with injuries. Ryder's, I think, is a little bit more serious than a player like Deontay Johnson. So let's transition a little bit to the linebacker position. Look, man, I have like 6 linebackers, and I don't love that. But it's mostly because Isaiah Simmons isn't really a linebacker, and Carter Coughlin is a special teams player. And Carter Coughlin would be my first player out, and we could talk about that maybe in a little bit. But I have Bobby Okereke, Micah McFadden, Isaiah Simmons, Darius Muasau, Deontay Johnson. I did put in there, and then Carter Coughlin. I think a player like Matt Adams, though, once he gets healthy, the Giants will try to probably put him on the practice squad. I don't know how serious the lower body injury is. I believe it's a lower body injury. They'll try to sneak him probably back on. That could come at the expense of a player like Carter Coughlin, or the Giants could just claim somebody else. I don't think they claimed anybody last year off of waivers at this time of the year. The previous season, I want to say they claimed like 4. I think it was Nick McLeod, Jason Pinnock, Jack Anderson, and there might have been another player that they claimed as well. But last year they didn't, and I could see them doing it again this season, and I think that would come at the expense of Carter Coughlin, who missed a lot of training camp. So he's the one that I have here that I'm like, I'm not sure, but he's there right now.
I think he's even more of a lock. When I look at this linebacker, I have the same group, which I'm surprised. I thought this was one we might have a difference in, because I thought I might have been taking a little bit of liberty putting Deontay Johnson on my list, because I did put him on there just given the injury situation. But then I looked at it and it's like Matt Adams, the guy who was between, is also injured right now. So it's kind of just a tricky spot from an injury standpoint right now with the Giants at linebacker. Based on that, I think Carter Coughlin has a good chance to make the roster. They need healthy bodies here right now. You even mentioned McFadden is dealing with things. It could be like, I'm looking at this inside linebacker group, and we'll get to edge in a minute, as a little bit scary heading into week 1, Nick,
Could be.
just because of these injuries. That's the real reason. They've been very unlucky with injuries. I would have felt pretty good if McFadden and Deontay Johnson were healthy heading into week 1. We don't really know either of their status, but I'm going to go right now with they're banking on the upside of Deontay Johnson, and they're going to keep him on that week 1 roster.
I think McFadden will be fine for week 1. I don't think I've heard anything that suggests that he wouldn't. It's just he's had a slow ramp up through training camp and hasn't really been fully healthy. But let's go to edge. I got 5. Dan, Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, Benton Whitley, Boogie Basham, and Azeez Ojulari. So I did put Whitley. I think he just played well throughout preseason. I think he is explosive. I think he can bend a little bit. And I think he has a good rip move. And that's what the Giants want for these wide rushers. That's why you go out and you get a superstar, potential superstar in a Brian Burns. Whitley is obviously not Brian Burns, but can he, stress an offensive tackle's angle and bend around the edge? Yeah. And I think we've seen that through preseason. Now, can he do that against first teamers? I don't know. But you know what? I think he's shown enough to make the initial 53 and be one of the back end players on the roster.
Whitley has definitely showed enough to make the initial 53. He's performed in that way. He didn't make my initial group just because I had the tough decision with keeping that extra offensive lineman or not. I went with the offensive lineman there, and I also then took, had to take a spot back because I added DeVito back to the roster. I thought you made a very good case for why DeVito just needs to be on it given the lock injury situation. So I had to cut here, and I took it out there. It was really Boogie, horrible first season with the Giants, for being honest on tape, has looked pretty much better this year. Not we don't think he's going to be a world beater all of a sudden, but I feel like he's in better football shape. He's in better shape for maybe the position they want him to play within this scheme, and that could help him be a productive player. I think he's proven enough that he gets that last roster spot over Whitley for me, just because there's a crunch at the end for me with the offensive line keeping so many with 9.
I feel you, man. So edge, I feel better this year, obviously, because of Brian Burns. Linebacker, I think I feel better this year because I'm higher on Micah McFadden, and the Giants added some depth and retained Isaiah Simmons. Defensive line, I feel worse because there is no Leonard Williams. And then we didn't do offensive linemen. We forgot to do that. So the offensive line, I feel obviously much better than I did last year heading into the season.
Yeah, we didn't do receivers too, but I think O-line and receivers, we both feel much better about. D-line, I feel worse. I agree on that. Edge, I feel better, obviously, with Burns. Linebacker, I don't feel better about, though, just because A, McFadden's hurt going into the year, and B, I just still don't know if I trust his fit in this system personally. But I will say this: if they could get Deontay Johnson healthy and Musalik, those guys have added depth that I'm intrigued by. I don't want to say they make me immediately feel better, but I'm at least intrigued by what they can offer in this system. So I'll say even on that one for me.
It'd be cool to see KJ Cloyd just be the surprise guy on his team after that preseason. He was added like 2 weeks ago. Highly doubt it, but anything can happen. He did play freaking well, and he looked explosive out there. Very explosive. Go check out the tweets about KJ Cloyd. Let's move on, Dan, to the cornerback spot. So I have 6 corners right now. Banks, McLeod, Flott, Andrew Phillips, Hawkins, and then Trey Herndon I also have, because he didn't even play in the 3rd preseason game, which is a telltale sign. He's more than likely going to make this team.
Yeah, we have the same group here. The five that are locks are the five you mentioned. The first four you mentioned, obviously Banks, Phillips, and McLeod to me are the three. And then Flott, obviously it hasn't been a great camp for him, and it's going to be summer, but I think he's close to a lock as a roster spot. It's 4. Herndon not dressing, that gave it away. So then it comes down to that 6th spot. I think they're going to keep 6. It's just a matter of if it's Trey Hawkins. And I think ultimately looking at the rest of the players who he's competing against, Hawkins is the guy that's going to get this spot. He's had 2 years now with the Giants. Regular season last year, thrown right into the fire. It wasn't great, obviously, but again, thrown right into the fire. It's always been about his development as a developmental late round, 6th round pick. So I feel comfortable giving him that final spot as well.
Yeah, and Hawkins didn't even play in the 3rd preseason game.
Another good sign. Yeah.
So then we have safety. Oh yeah, and I feel worse about the cornerback room without Adoree being here. Safeties. Look, it was tough for the safeties. Obviously, Nubin, Pinnock, and Belton are locks, and there's that 4th spot. And I like Javarius Owens, and I think Javarius Owens is a good special teamer, but Javarius Owens hasn't seen the field since like August 12th with the knee injury.
True.
And Alex Johnson's had a good camp. And Alex Johnson played like 68 freaking snaps, I think, in the preseason week 3, which tends to be like, man, you're probably not making this team. But if there's anybody who was out there playing a lot of snaps that I think could have earned a roster spot, mostly because everybody else is injured or ineffective, it was Alex Johnson. So I think I'm going to go with Alex Johnson, but really there's a lot of conjecture here because if Javarius Owens' knee is fine, then I would put Javarius Owens. I just don't really know the extent of his injury. But for this exercise, let's go with Alex Johnson as a surprise.
It makes it tough because we don't know like the injuries with the extent with him, Deontay, Gunner, like all these players that ultimately, like, we won't be surprised if they don't make the roster because we just find out, oh, guess what? You had no injury information. We did, and these guys are way more hurt than you realize. So I went with Owens in hopes that he had shown enough earlier in camp that the injury isn't serious enough that they feel comfortable with him for week 1. But if you're right, if they don't feel comfortable with him for week 1, he's not making the roster, if he's that far away from playing. So this one's tricky. Obviously, the first 3 are locks, and we don't need like Nubin, Pinnock, and Belton have earn their roster spots and are going to play a lot of snaps for the Giants. And I'll be honest, like we talked about where we're at. Obviously, I don't feel as comfortable without Xavier McKinney, but I'll say this, Nick, I like the fit for Nubin and Belton in this system a lot more than I like the fit for Nubin and Belton in Wink Martindale's system.
Great point.
So for that reason alone, I don't feel that uncomfortable. And I don't feel that much worse about where they're at safety.
Yeah, when I was talking to Belton after one of the practice, I think I said this on the podcast, that I think of him as an elite defensive guard in basketball, like a Tony Allen, right? Like a Pat Beverly, just somebody who has excellent eyes and who anticipates very well. And that plays right in to the palms, the quarters, those types of systems that we're going to see, those types of play styles that we're going to see with Shane Bowen. And I think Nubin is that same exact way. I mean, Nubin ran a very similar system at Minnesota. And I think Pinnock is just a phenomenal athlete who can go out there. But I think the safeties could be okay if they take the necessary developmental steps. But if there's some regression there, that could be a problem. And also if the Giants are relying heavily on these safeties in run support, like Dane Belton, not the best with that. I think Pinnock will be fine, but a little bit wild into the tackle point. And I think Nubin will also be fine. But overall, I do feel worse without having X-Man here.
And I'll say one thing about that, Nick. I think because they're going to have to play a lot of safety, or they're going to want to play a lot of safeties this year, it's what led me to my decision to put Owens in, because Owens, before the injury, proved in my mind at least that he's on the level of what you might want to see and might need to see on a football field in September, August, and September, October, November, not just the preseason time. Like he could potentially play with NFL players at that speed, and they might need a 4 safety at some point if injuries hit, because they're going to play a lot of safeties, especially given what's going on at corner.
And then Graham Gano, Jamie Gillen, Casey Kreider round out the special teams. And and that's it. And I think practice squad guys look like, I think it's a lot of the guys that were on the fringes, Dante Miller, Jack Stoll,
Kubas,
McKinnon, definitely a Kubas. If he doesn't make the team, they're going to really desperately try to get him on there, I'd imagine. Asante, Bryce Ford Wheaton, KJ Cloud, Timon Fox, players like that. Alex Johnson, if he doesn't make the team, or Javarius.
They'll add guys from other teams as well for that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. I mean, look, Joe Shane's been pretty active as a GM around this time of year, so I think it's possible that some guys that aren't on the roster right now will be on the roster come, week 1 and week 2 even. But we'll have to see what happens there. But that's our 53-man.
And the position group the position groups that I think the Giants are really going to target. The one in particular is cornerback, but I think safety too, if Javarius Owens can't get back healthy and
Yep.
if they're not sold on Alex Johnson. But cornerback, look, dude, they've signed how many corners? Breon Borders, Christian Holmes,
They've tried.
Mario Goodrich. They've tried. So once final cuts come, there's going to be a player or two possibly that's going to get released that the Giants are going to pounce on. Again, they didn't do it last year, but they did it the previous year, and they've shown all throughout training camp that anytime a cornerback that they somewhat liked was released or waived, they pounced on him and they brought him in to try him out. Now, it's 53 is a big difference from a 90-man roster, but I can see them going after a player on whatever team is rich in cornerbacks, if there is a team that's rich in cornerbacks.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. All right. Thanks again to everybody tuning in to Big Blue Banter Podcast. Keep it locked and loaded this week. We're going to have more content coming, previewing the season, things like bowl predictions, our season prediction. I know people love that. We were good on it 2 years ago. We were bad on it last year, our win-loss prediction. Let's see if we can get it right this year, Nick, and everything else. So just keep it locked and loaded. And then we get into the fun stuff, the games, week 1, film reviews. Initial reaction to week 1. I'm excited. I hope the Giants can win that first game, Nick, and we'll have to see. Sam Darnold is a quarterback they should be able to get to, I hope.
I'd say so. And as I've made this joke so many times, Dan, let's hope MetLife is haunted again.
Yeah, exactly. I hope he's seeing ghosts again. And Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, those are his ghosts. All right. Have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you very soon. Thanks again, and go Giants.